You're listening to episode 106 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. On this week's show, teaching kids to cook sustainably with my guest, cooking instructor and cookbook author, Jenny Chandler. Jenny is the author of Green Kids Cook. It's a book that aims to encourage and teach children ages 7 to 14 and beyond how to cook and eat food that's as good for their bodies as it is for the planet. This book is for tweens and teens, but I will tell you, I am an empty nester and I want to make everything in the book. Besides recipes, the book also features crafts, how-tos, tips for reducing food waste at home, and so much more. We are giving away a copy of Green Kids Cook to one lucky U.S. winner. So head on over to the show notes from this episode to enter for a chance to win. So what is in store on today's show? Well, on the show, Jenny and I will share some of her plant-forward recipes from the book, including a recipe for green peas and coconut soup, a recipe for seeded oat bread, and we will wrap it up with dessert. And of course, we're going to give you tips for getting kids to cook, appreciate, love, and eat more fruits and vegetables. So Jenny joins us today from Bristol, England, and we actually first met at a conference when Jenny was serving as the United Nations European ambassador for the International Year of Pulses. So she's been on the show before, actually, to talk about pulses, things like lentils, beans, chickpeas, and to also talk about one of her other cookbooks, Great Food for Kids. Her goal is to help you and your children and your grandchildren get more plants on the plate. And that is exactly what we will do today. So a few friendly reminders before we get started. If you love the show, tell a friend about it. Post a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me at lizshealthytable.com and be sure to check out the show notes for recipes, tips, and of course, information on how you can enter the giveaway. And follow me at Liz Weiss on Instagram. And now I am excited to welcome Jenny Chandler from across the pond back onto the podcast. Hey, Jenny.
Hi, Liz. Oh, it's lovely to be back with you. Thank you so much for inviting me on again.
Well, thank you so much. And I figured we would just kick it off by having you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself. I just gave you a very brief introduction, where you live, your family, what you do. What is, a day in the life of Jenny Chandler?
Right. Well, I have a daughter who's 15, who, is sort of growing out of these books that I've written in a sense, although she's always been my kind of inspiration. My husband, Peter, makes wildlife films. So I suppose a lot of my kind of inspiration and a lot of my information about what's going on out in the sort of the wider world comes from Peter, from his filming trips. And yeah, I live in Bristol, which is a city of, it's about 500,000 in the west of England. It's quite a big city, but yet I can still pretty much walk anywhere, which is really what I love to do. I can walk to all my local shops. Imi can walk to school. Peter can walk to work. And then we live right by this kind of 300-foot deep gorge with a great big suspension bridge across it. And I can walk across the bridge and I'm in open countryside. So kind of I feel like I have the best of both worlds. And as a kind of foodie centre, Bristol's surrounded by amazing countryside. And so we have lots and lots of really great local producers, which gets me very excited. And work-wise, I write and I also teach both kind of individuals who come on cooking days at various different cookery schools, but also increasingly I'm working with the Humane Society International, training professional chefs who work in big contract catering like hospitals, universities, schools, helping them to put more plant-based protein on plates. So using more pulses and more whole grains and more seeds instead of kind of cheaper meat, which is often all they can really budget for. So that for me is something really exciting. And that's kind of driven again by my desire to make people eat more healthily and more sustainably, and also with animal welfare in the picture as well. So I've been doing quite a lot of that recently as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, because when you said the Humane Society, it's like it didn't dawn on me, that link obviously to eating more plants, fewer animals. When we talk about sustainability, what exactly does that mean? Because I think we banter this term around a lot, but can you just explain to people, what does it mean if you say, I want everyone to eat sustainably?
Well, I think it's about choosing ingredients that have the least impact on the environment around you. And, it's not just about food miles and things traveling halfway across the world, or even crops that use lots of water, or even things which use lots of fertilizers and pesticides. Those are the first things that jump into your mind. But also it's this idea of intensive farming, which just pushes out all the other living things. So, if you have mile upon mile, I should say, I say mile upon mile, don't I, in the States? Mile upon mile of, say, maize or soya or whatever it might be. There aren't going to be many insects and rodents and all these other creatures that we kind of need in the big network of life. So for me, it's about biodiversity as well. So it's eating a really good range of all sorts of different ingredients so that we create habitats for other wildlife, other beings to inhabit our planet as well as us. So there are so many different levels to it. And I feel that, we mustn't get bogged down in all of it too much. I just sort of think if I'm eating with food which is seasonal and which is quite local and which is predominantly plants, then I'm making some very good steps in the right direction.
Right. And probably not wasting so much food, because you could eat, that ideal diet, but then end up wasting a lot of food at home. And we'll get into that a little bit, but I'm sure that would fit into the sustainability story in a big way as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. That's another very, very big factor. Yes.
So, so you're on this mission, to teach kids to cook and to cook sustainably. And obviously when I think of kids cooking, I always think like the entree recipe is like the cookie. Parents tend to cook all the time with kids, and baking quite often. You got the bowl, you got the whisk. It's pretty easy. You crack a few eggs. But my sense is that you really want kids to go beyond that and to really start to experiment with cooking fruits and cooking vegetables and preparing. I always say, if you can't slice an apple, you're probably, never going to really eat an apple. What kid can bite into an apple when they, half the time they have no teeth or they have braces. So why is it so important for us as adults to really inspire and engage our kids to cook more, and not just baking, but really get into the kitchen and start to get into those plants?
Well, firstly, I completely understand the baking thing. It is easier. There are less dangers involved. And also, kids are always going to love the cookie that comes out the other end. But actually, there's been loads of research which shows that children who cook and are kind of involved with preparing savory ingredients, and involved particularly with preparing vegetables and getting to know lots of different vegetables, are much more likely to be adventurous eaters. And the more that children handle and shop for and think about all the different plants they could be eating, the more likely they are to want to eat them. Now, you obviously have the obstacles of things like learning knife skills. And I do this because I'm always thinking of holding your food like a claw while you're slicing it. And I always liken it to, when you get a kid on a bicycle and the first time that you let them set off down the road, a road with cars on it without you, is utterly terrifying. But kind of it has to happen at some point. And I feel that in the same way, things like using knives or dealing with heat, it's something which, as a parent, we always want to protect our kids, but you kind of have to just think, right, I've shown them, how to do things. They understand the dangers. And there comes a point where I just have to step back and let them do those things. And, I know in the States, just as we do in England, we have a massive problem with obesity. And we really need our kids to be eating healthier food. And if one of the most kind of effective ways of doing that is actually getting them cooking things, then great, let's do it. And, you know, I've taught in primary schools, so junior schools in England, where I get out a load of vegetables and different bits and pieces and put them on the desk. And you have all these kids going, don't like this, you know, and you're thinking, oh gosh, you know, here we've got quite a, you know, sort of hurdle to cross here. And then as soon as they get involved, and then there's a bit of peer pressure often between, you know, the different kids, but as soon as they get involved with the cooking and get excited about what they're doing, they kind of forget that a bit of cabbage went in there that they were utterly horrified about 5 minutes beforehand, because they're doing it and they're the boss. I often think it's a good idea to give children choices. So, you know, I would say, right, we're making a soup and we're going to put 3 green vegetables in it, and I'll have 6 green vegetables in front of them. And so they feel empowered. They don't feel like I'm telling them which vegetable they've got to eat. And maybe 2 of those vegetables, like, say, the peas and the broccoli, certainly in England, those seem to be the sort of easy sellers as far as it comes to green veg. You know, they're not going to have a problem with. But the 3rd green, they're going to be thinking, oh, you know, which one shall I go for? But because they're in charge, it seems to really make a difference. So I think empowering children to make some choices, but to limit the choices so that whichever choice they make is going to be quite a healthy one, is a really good way of going about things.
So I'm going to digress for a second because, you know, I'm thinking of your daughter. You said she's 15. And I know from following you on Instagram that she is very comfortable in the kitchen. I mean, who would doubt that for a second? And throughout the pandemic, I followed you on Instagram because every Friday night, I believe you and your daughter and your husband would do a theme night. Now, I always talk about theme nights like Taco Tuesday or Pizza Fridays, you know, ways to, it makes meal planning easier. It gets kids excited about dinner because they know, yeah, it's Tuesday, I'm having tacos. They could build their own. But you guys did this theme night every Friday through COVID. And these were not just like any theme night. But if I were a kid, I would have so wanted to be in your house every Friday night through COVID. Can you just tell everybody a little bit about your theme nights? And by the way, people can go to your Instagram and you do have in your highlights, you know, a theme night button. What's your Instagram handle? And tell us about theme nights.
So yeah, my Instagram handle is Jenny Chandler UK. So that's nice and easy for you. The theme nights. Well, you know, like you guys, we had lockdown where we weren't allowed out of the house, and you know, I had an only child. I thought she'd be going mad with boredom with, you know, us around her, no sort of none of her friends around the place. So we thought the first one came about because Imi, just before lockdown, had been in Italy, and she'd been in Venice just before the carnival. I mean, she'd been in the hotbed of COVID. So, you know, she got back and I was thinking, hell, I was watching her for symptoms every day. Anyway, it was just about to be carnival. So we decided to have our own Venetian carnival night. And so we cooked some Italian food and we wore Venetian masks, which she'd brought back from Italy. And we sort of glammed up a bit. My husband wore, you know, a smoking jacket, black tie, and I wore a dress. And that was how it kicked off. And then we thought, well, actually, that was fun. And it kind of broke up the week a bit. So we each took it in turns. We went each week, one of us would choose the theme, and the theme involved the dressing up. It involved music, which my husband really got into the sort of Spotify playlist to go along with the theme night. It involved a menu, and obviously we weren't allowed out a lot of this time. So it was involving sort of looking at what we'd got in the cupboard of how the hell we were going to put this together. And it was such good fun. I mean, we had a kind of Breton night, so a northern French night, where it was all about kind of, you know, sort of baguettes and mayonnaise. And we had, oh gosh, what did we have that night? Oh yes, we made buckwheat crepes. And actually they're in the book, those buckwheat pancakes, which you put an egg into and sort of fold them over with a bit of spinach. Delicious. And we had an ancient Egyptian night where my husband dressed up as Tutankhamun and Imi was wrapped in kind of white sheeting like a mummy, and I was Queen Nefertiti. And actually for that night, we were at that point allowed to get takeaways. And there's an amazing Egyptian lady who lives up the road who cooks traditional Egyptian food. So we even had koshari, this amazing Egyptian dish to go with it. It was such good fun. And it really made me think how you could be really resourceful. And the food was such a big part of it, and planning the menu. No, it was great. I mean, by the end of it, I have to admit that I think Pete and I were probably more excited about it than daughter Imi. When we got to the end of lockdown, one of the things she said is, "Oh, thank heavens we don't have to do any more of that dressing up." So I realized that actually probably it was the parents getting more excited than the kid. But, there we go.
You must be good at sewing, because when I was looking at some of these costumes, I'm like, how on earth did they pull this off every single week? So do you have a sewing machine? Fess up.
I have a sewing machine, and I also have a great big kind of box filled with all sorts of funny old bits of material and things. And then, for instance, Peter's Pussy Galore dress from James Bond, because he, of course, had to be the female character that night, then was refashioned into Tutankhamun's kind of golden casket the following week. So, yeah, a lot of sewing and chopping and cardboard and all that kind of stuff.
So fun. You made it fun. I loved following along. So tell us about your newest book, Green Kids Cook. I love it. I love the illustrations. I love the photographs of the kids prepping every single recipe. So just give us broad, big picture. What is this book about? And then we can get into some of the recipes.
The book is about kids having fun, number one, because I just think if you present anything which looks kind of dull and preachy and boring, you're just losing right from the beginning. It's a book about having fun in the kitchen, but eating far more kind of fruit and veg and really thinking about where things come from. Partly it was the feeling of the overwhelm of what's going on in the world at the moment. And I think that, however much we try and kind of protect our children on the news, on social media, everywhere they're hearing about all these different things to do with climate change and looking after wildlife and hearing about, fires in California or floods. And I think it could be terrifying for all of us. And I think all of us, if we feel that we're empowered, if we feel that we can do one little thing to help, it can make us feel so much more in control. And so the whole idea of the book is that you have kind of fun recipes, fun little crafting projects that don't use too many resources, and also that are kind of practical things that I would hope that children can take with them into their kind of adult life with them. I had actually a message from a girl who's just gone away to college. And she said, I was really embarrassed turning up with the kids' cookbook, but Mum made me bring it. And she said, I cooked the dal on my first night in the student flat that she's in with 6 people. And she said, I've already got 5 really good friends. And so, yes, it's a cookbook for kids. But actually, I just think there are so many adults out there who could really do with just learning how to make simple, really nutritious, healthy dishes, but that are appealing, that don't feel kind of worthy and like you've bought them from a kind of health food shop necessarily. They just feel like real, exciting, fresh food. So that was the push behind the book.
So what kinds of recipes will we find? Snacks, main dishes, soups? What's in there?
Well, it's right the way through, from little snacky things. Of course, there's some sweet things in there. You can't have a book for children without the odd cookie or muffin. But really, it's predominantly a book of how to cook a meal, because I just think if a child can cook a meal, there's something really exciting about that. Certainly my experience with Imi was that age sort of 8 or 9, if she could cook, it didn't have to be a great big banquet, but a 2-course meal, a main course and a pudding, or a soup and a main course, and invite a neighbor or a grandparent or a friend round, and she had prepared the meal, there was this sense of just massive achievement and pride. And then that joy that I think most of us as adults, if we enjoy cooking, that sharing a meal at the table with other people is just a really lovely feeling. And for a child to be able to do that, rather than just knowing how to cook, cupcakes and bits and pieces, I just think it's really nice to actually be able to cook real food. Putting a meal on the table was really what I wanted to do. So it's a whole mix of dishes. Also, in the States, you have so many different influences in your cuisine. In Britain, also, more and more, our children are really excited about Asian food, and they really like all sorts of different types of food, much, much more adventurous than I was as a child. I mean, spaghetti bolognese was kind of exotic in my house when I was growing up. Whereas this has got things like, Korean gyoza dumplings, and it's got, French buckwheat pancakes, or it might have an Indian dal. And I think introducing children to lots of wonderful flavors is just a great way to make kind of adventurous good eaters out of them.
I'm thinking maybe even to send this to Simon, he's 20. He just turned 23, in fact, yesterday. But he and his roommates in college, he's a senior, they're cooking all the time. And he is a big fan of dal. So this might be good for him.
Well, he could always hide the cookbook. Nobody needs to know where his source of the recipes are coming from.
He could put one of those, he could make a cover like out of a brown shopping bag, like our parents, we did when we were kids, put a little book cover. Maybe I'll send it with the book cover.
Giveaway will be the photographs inside. And those kids, it was wonderful. I managed to get all the kids from our neighborhood who had all gone to the same kind of junior school as my daughter. I just rang different parents and said, hey, would your kids feel like coming along and cooking for a day? And we shot the whole the whole book. We shot it in a house and garden, just literally about 5 minutes walk from my house. So it was just it felt very natural and very real.
I love it because I love to see the kids cooking. I love the illustration. So if there's something hot, you'll put like an exclamation point. So just people, reminding the reader, like, be careful. This is, you're going to be near the stove. So it's super fun. It's very creative. I thought we could talk about, a few of the recipes. Specifically, there was one recipe that caught my eye that I really want to make. And it's a recipe for green peas and coconut soup. Now just so everybody knows, I, 2 weeks ago, was out mountain biking with my husband because he, of course, is like, come on, let's go. And we're off road and it's sandy and I kind of lose my balance and I fall to the left and I brace myself with my foot and then the bike falls on me. And needless to say, I've torn my ACL and my MCL. I am on crutches. So those of you who are watching this interview, here's a crutch. I'm not lying. So I, of course, had high hopes to be cooking a bunch of recipes out of Jenny's book. And then what's happening, and Jenny and I were talking about this before the interview got started, when I sent Tim, my husband, to the grocery store, it is like I have literally pulled a tooth out of his mouth without Novocaine because he is I don't know where anything is. I need the aisle by aisle list. And he's like in a panic and he won't ask anybody in the store for help. And then he comes out 3 times. I'm like, you got to go back in. I'm sitting in the parking lot. So I really wanted to make this soup. But then the thought of telling him to buy a can of coconut milk, like he's never bought it before, I have to stick to the basics. So long story short, I haven't made this recipe yet, but it is on page 72 of the book. So I thought we could tell people about green pea and coconut soup. And there's this sweet girl here cooking this recipe. You see her. Oh my gosh, I'm adoring the book so much. So green pea and coconut soup. Tell us a little bit about this recipe, Jenny. What are the ingredients? And I love, by the way, that Jenny does this you'll get like metric and you'll also get, what do we call our measurements? It's like let's see, your imperial. Oh my gosh, I sound like a silly girl here. Right. Yes. And by the way, thank you for that index in the back because I had emailed Jenny to say, what are porridge oats exactly? I was starting to Google. Meanwhile, I had the glossary right there. And spring onions would be scallions or green onions. And I did send Tim to the supermarket the other day to get an onion, and he came home with green onions. So it's like I'm doing my best, people. I'm doing my best. So this recipe starts out with some coconut oil or some rapeseed oil, or you could use like I guess an olive oil or canola oil. You probably would go with organic, and you're going to saute up these sliced spring onions and some garlic. And you've got some ginger in there as well. So you're going to saute that up. And then where do we go from there on this recipe?
Then, I mean, what I love about this recipe and why I wanted to include it is sometimes you want your kids to maybe be doing some cooking, but you don't want them in the kitchen for 3 hours, and sometimes they get back from school and they're hungry. again, the recipe's got to be fairly quick. So it's just literally frying up those scallions and the ginger and the garlic and some of the stalks from the cilantro. It's one of those things that I don't know why, if you're in Thailand, Singapore, all these different Asian places, they use the stalks. They even use the roots of the cilantro. And I don't know in the States, but in England, people tend to use the leaves and just chuck away the rest. So you can chop away at the stalks quite finely and put them in the soup, and they really add flavor to the soup. And then quite literally, you can go to your freezer if you have some frozen little green peas, or if you had some fresh ones in pods, then fantastic. But I just like to be realistic, and you want some things where you don't have to go out and do loads of shopping. So then you just dump in your little green peas, some vegetable stock, and I'm perfectly happy, for you to use a stock cube. Just check it's not one of those really salty ones. Cook it just until those peas are tender. And if they're the frozen ones, really all you're doing is just sort of defrosting them. They haven't really got to cook much more. And then you just whiz that up to a puree. And I can't remember, did I put the coconut in before or after? No, I whizzed it up to a puree.
No, you did it after.
Nice and smooth. You add the coconut milk and you just reheat it. And then a little bit of lime. I've used lime juice because it tends to sort of marry better with the coconut and the cilantro. It all feels quite Asian, and the ginger. But you could just put a bit of lemon juice if that's what you got in there. And it really is, it's a soup that you can make in 15 minutes. And it's as good cold, in the height of summer, that with some ice cubes in it is just delicious. Or in the wintertime, it's a really quick hot soup. And, you're getting at least one of your portions, if not, 1.5 to 2 portions of veg in that soup. In one go. And I find kids love that sweetness of green peas. They're one of the naturally sweetest veg there are around. So, it's one that doesn't tend to scare too many of them off.
I tend to use the frozen petite peas because I personally just prefer them. I feel like they're a little less starchy. And
yeah, they are. They're really sweet.
They're lovely. Yeah, they're much sweeter. So look for the petite peas. And then for people who don't like cilantro, I happen to love it, but there are the cilantro haters. Could you use parsley and a little bit of mint, perhaps? Would that be?
Yes. I mean, I would probably just a little bit of mint at the end would be absolutely delicious. Pea and mint, wonderful together. Or even pea and basil, because actually they use basil in quite a lot of Thai and Asian cooking, along with ginger and coconut. So a little bit of basil in there. Sorry, you say basil, don't you?
We say basil. Yeah, we say basil. You say basil.
So a little bit of basil, a little bit of basil in there would be delicious as well. And I try through the book to often say to the kids, this is a recipe for carrot and beetroot beet fritters, carrot and beet fritters. But if you don't like beet, how about putting in carrot and zucchini? Or if you don't like, so the whole thing is to give them a little bit of choice, but also it means that you can do that kind of clean sweep of your vegetable drawer in your fridge or your vegetable basket. Or if I don't know, in the States, the thing of getting a veg box from a farm, is that a big thing?
Yeah, we have something called a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, where you could have a share. And that means every week you pick up or they deliver a box with whatever's growing that week. And it's a really great way to support the small local farms. So yeah.
Yeah, that's growing more and more in Britain, where people will have their box of kind of random. You've got no choice. It just arrives, vegetables there. So it is that whole idea of being kind of flexible and adaptable. And that's what I hope comes across in a lot of the recipes, is that, you can always, whether it's personal choice or whether it's the season or it's just what you happen to have in your cupboard, you can change things around a little bit.
So your book is not like, it is more or less like a vegetarian kind of a cookbook. But if you do want to add a little bit of, fish, chicken, beef, how do you balance that? Because you talked earlier about eating sustainably, eating mostly plants. And when I think of plant-based, I do think of mostly plants. But then if you love eggs, if you love cheese, if you love chicken, go for it. So how do we balance that?
I personally feel that certainly with children, the one battle we never seem to have is getting them to eat a burger or a chicken breast or whatever it might be. That's never the battle. So this is why I really felt I wanted to do a book which was really plant focused, because if you can get a kid to eat half the amount of chicken or one sausage instead of two and have a great big portion of vegetables beside it, then brilliant. That's great too. I just think that, I'm really supportive of vegans and vegetarians, but I think the way forward for us to become more sustainable is for us to embrace everybody. And there are a lot of people who do enjoy their meat and do enjoy their fish and maybe buy it. I personally get my meat from a regenerative farmer where I really feel like the meat is playing a role in the whole cycle of the crops. But whatever your reasoning behind eating that meat, whether it's just because you think it's delicious, we do, and we're all being told we do need to eat a bit less of it. Meat does use up more land per kind of calorie, more water per calorie, and also habitat loss. We're losing much more habitat because of expanding meat farming. So I think it's really important that we do all eat less of it if we really enjoy it. And then for me, I think that means that you absolutely kind of prize that bit of meat when you do have it, or that bit of fish. But then I also think that if you give a child meat and vegetables, they'll scoff the meat because they're really hungry and they love it. And then it's that, they're not quite so hungry and they're left with the veg and they push it around their plate maybe. If you give a child a vegetarian meal some days, not necessarily every day, but some days, something like the gyoza dumplings. Do you have those in the States? The little tiny pot sticker dumplings. I mean, every child I meet seems to have a fixation with those at the moment. They're a real sort of fashion in England at the moment. So the pot sticker dumplings in this book are filled with mushrooms and edamame beans, or the little green soybeans. And if I presented a kid with a plate of mushrooms and edamame beans, most of them would probably run in the opposite direction. You chop them up and you make this absolutely flavorsome, delicious stuffing and put it inside a little dumpling, which is the dumpling of their desires that they want to eat. And it's extraordinary. And there isn't a meat choice. That's it. That's what you're cooking. And I find that so often it's actually narrowing the choices on the plate, not when you're cooking, have lots of choices of what to put into something, but one thing on the plate, and that is supper. And, and if that is supper and they're hungry, they might think, oh, not sure. But then there's been research done that says that, new foods are scary to all of us, because when we were cavemen, we didn't all want our children running around eating every berry and every leaf they could find. Otherwise, it's survival, isn't it?
Wouldn't end well.
Yeah, exactly. And so basically, children, all of us have this kind of instinctive fear of new foods. But if that new food arrives kind of 5, 6, 7, and they say 8 is the magic number, I don't know why, but if something arrives on your plate 8 times, you are very unlikely to reject it. There will be 1 or 2 foods that you really don't want, but it's that thing of just keeping trying. So I just think, it's not rocket science. We know that plants are really nutritious and that lots of us may be eating plenty of food, but we're almost wearing food waste around our waistlines because we're eating plenty of food which isn't necessarily the good food for us. And plants are fantastic food for us. So we just, if we get the ratio of those, more of those on the plate than anything else, you're off to a really good start without making it too technical, because with kids, you don't want it to be technical. You just want it to be about, this is a lovely place of food. And the great thing about it is it's not only good for you, but it's also really good for all the wildlife and everything else around you, because you're eating this lovely mixed diet.
That's right. It makes me think of starting the meal with a salad. I mean, what a great tradition. We tend to do that here a lot in the US. You sit down to dinner, you have your salad. I always say, forget the bread. You don't need to fill up on the bread. Bring that out later. Let's start with the salad, or at breakfast, let's start with some fruit. And then if that's what's sitting there, of course they're going to eat it. So you say in the book that you don't want kids to be climate change worriers. You want them to be climate change warriors. And I love that message from the book. And it really does tie into cooking more sustainably, eating lots of vegetables, wasting less food. But when it comes to food waste, we know that a lot of us do waste. And you buy something, best laid plans, it sits there and you ultimately throw it away. What would be like your best tip for families for reducing food waste in their home kitchens?
Well, one of the tips in the book, actually, there's a really lovely graphic of a fridge with the shelves in there, is to have a kind of use me now shelf in the fridge. So, you move everything and then the top shelf may be in the fridge, or maybe it should be lower so a kid can see where it is as well, is the kind of like, help, I'm getting close to my use by date, use me now. And I think that is one really good thing to begin with, because, we lose things in the back there, don't we? You forget what you've got. So there's that. And then there are lots of recipes in the book for things like minestrone soup. Minestrone soup is it just means big soup in Italian. And it's just the soup where you dump all the bits and pieces. And I don't mean dump rubbish, because there shouldn't be any rubbish in your fridge to begin with, but where you put, all your odd scraps of different vegetables and things like the bread, which is going a little bit stale. There's a recipe in the book for just like instant croutons, where you just literally toast a piece of dry bread when it's sort of, getting close to the end of its life. And then you put it into a little bowl with some garlic and olive oil and maybe some parmesan or nutritional yeast if you're vegan, and you toss it around and then you put that on the top of the soup. So you've used your old bread up as well. And those things don't have to be, they don't have to feel like you're making any sacrifices. In fact, I just think so much of all of our food heritage that we've all taken on from our grandparents, they really did use up leftovers. So lots of great dishes rely on leftovers. So it's just trying to not let them go away and be hidden in the depths of your fridge. And then just having like a clean sweep about kind of, once every 3 or 4 days, you just think, right, I'm going to kind of clear that out. I also find that the way that I shop now, and we tend to shop locally and more often rather than doing the huge shop once a week. I waste so much less and I buy so much less because I'm just thinking 3 days ahead. And I know lots of people will say, I don't have time for that. But actually, shopping has become part of our kind of family fun. At a weekend, my husband, Imi, and I will go, and I'm sure, round in different areas of the States, there's some fantastic farmers markets, and you have like street food stalls, and there's a whole kind of world there of enjoyment. And, Imi will often make her shopping list of something that she wants to cook, and Pete will be looking for, his favorite cheese. He's a bit of a cheese nut. And we see that shopping trip as something which is kind of fun, rather than something which is a kind of, here we go. This is what I've got to fit this in between different things. And I think, we all find time to watch our favorite TV program, and we find time to maybe do some sports or whatever it might be. I just think if you can make gathering your food together, there are lots of fantastic people who grow lots of their own food. But, if you make getting your food into your house part of the kind of love and an enjoyment of it, that is also, it just adds to the whole kind of beauty of food and allows you to be more sustainable. So, even if it's once a month, if anybody does have a local market where they can really support these smaller farmers who tend to really be looking after their environment better than the huge farmers, I just think, just support them when you can. All of us will have different amounts of time or even money, because often that is a bit more expensive supporting those farmers. But then I think you by not wasting food. Often that bit of extra money you're paying for more local, more seasonal food, it's offset.
Which will last longer.
It'll last longer, and it's offset by the fact that you're just not wasting it. Because, if I go and buy a loaf of sourdough bread from my local baker, I am not wasting any of that. It costs 4 or 5 times the amount of a loaf from the supermarket. I'll eat every single bit of it, and it'll be nutritious. It'll be doing something for me. So I just always think, we need to value food, not just for, the moment of sitting and eating it and it filling us up, but for how it plays in our own body and how it plays out in the planet as well. Because some of those cheap foods, they're not really cheap when it comes to your own health or to the health of the land.
Right. It's an interesting perspective. So we have a farmer's market. I'm still on Nantucket. And I said to Tim, I've got to get to the farmer's market on Saturday because I don't care if I'm on the crutches. I got to go. It's going to be challenging because Nantucket, you have to realize it's like cobblestone streets. Oh, I don't know if he can, he's between his back and his wrist and his knee. He's got a bad knee as well. We're a mess. I will hobble through the market, and it's just, when you buy food from the farmer's market, it will last longer. So you will waste a lot less. And I shop there all summer. I work there a little bit here and there. And yeah, it'll be interesting hobbling my way through. The other thing that's happening on Nantucket this weekend, it is the start of scallop season. And they have bay scallops here. And they do kind of, I'm not going to say they're farm raised, they're not, but they do have seedlings that they nurture, and then they sort of disperse them in the various harbors so that it grows these beautiful scallops. And so it's sort of like, I guess you could say it's, not that they're farming, but yeah, they're definitely planting. It's like stocking a pond or something with trout. And so last year I went scalloping. Obviously this year that will not be happening given my injury. But I said to Tim, I will hobble my way onto the beach just to sit there and watch you guys go scalloping. And then we're going to cook them up at night, and I'll shuck them. I can do that sitting down. So that's super fun. It's like, foraging for your own food.
Oh, I think those food festivals and those moments where there's a season that you've been waiting for all year are just the best.
Oh, it's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, it's like Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter where you have special meals. But there are so many special meals you can have through the year if you wait for, I don't know, your local strawberries or your local peach season or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Or the tomatoes. Oh my gosh, the tomatoes. So good. They had you pick them here. And a friend of mine, Cynthia, she was like going crazy picking all these tomatoes. And she actually gave me a few. This was the day before the bike accident. And so it's like, oh gosh, I keep dwelling on that, but I will get better. So one more recipe. Well, I want to talk about dessert, but real quick, seeded oat bread, because I did tease this at the top. And your seeded oat bread does call for these porridge oats. I love the word porridge. And rolled oats, just basically rolled oats, same kind of thing. But tell us what's in this recipe. I actually might have the ingredients for this in my house. I might make this. I don't need Tim for this.
Well, this is another thing which is, really easy. And I wanted to make sure that this book, it's for age 7 to 14-year-olds, although, toddlers can cook alongside you. But I love the idea of a 7-year-old being able to cook something completely by themselves because the pride is there then. This, it's just literally the porridge oats, some yogurt, or you can use buttermilk or kefir. It's just got to be something with that acidity, a little bit of baking soda. So it's almost like a soda bread. And then it has loads and loads and loads of seeds in. So they can be pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds, chia seeds. It's that whole thing of looking in your cupboard and using up what you've got. And it's got a little bit of molasses, so a little bit of dark sugar, only a tiny amount, which gives it this wonderful kind of slightly treacly flavor. And I find that if we make a loaf of that, it is gone. It's sort of gone in a meal, and it's full of lovely fiber. It's healthy, it's wonderful, but it's also really Moorish and very, very simple to make. So it ticks all the boxes.
I love that term, Moorish. My husband always says that. I want more Moorish. Can I use honey if I don't have molasses? Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, that's the whole thing about the book. They're not kind of haute cuisine, Michelin-starred chef recipes, which, are measured to the nth degree, because that's just not what children's cooking is about. So yes, feel free to swap things in and out.
I have some beautiful local honey, so I'm looking at it now in my kitchen. So let's wrap it up with dessert. Give us a quick dessert from the book that seems to be a favorite with your kid readers.
Well, I've got a recipe for a galette, which is basically the French name for a big sort of flat tart. It's great because you don't have to have any special sort of baking equipment. It drives you mad how everything always has all these different tins and things you need. It's just a flat tray. And what's so lovely about this is you use whatever fruit you can find. So, peaches, apricots, plums, apples, blackberries, pears. And it's very simple to make. The pastry, you haven't got to lift it up and put it into anything. So younger kids can really gain confidence with making pastry doing this. And it's just a really beautiful way to finish a meal. And it looks fantastic because a really lovely big fruit tart that you slice into and everybody shares is such a lovely thing to bring out of the oven. And right now, in Britain, and I'm sure it's the sort of same time with you, we're real kind of blackberry and apple season now. So it's all those autumnal fruits, and it's just such a nice thing to make.
I'm going to try that too. Well, Jenny, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I adore the book. I love your mission. I like the balance. That's what people say about the podcast. I don't ever say, don't eat this, don't eat that. It's like, it all works. Everybody has different food preferences, but I love this mission of turning our kids into these climate change warriors. They're the next generation. So they're going to carry the torch for good. And I think your book gives them, like you said, it empowers them to do just that.
Oh, no. Well, thanks so much. I mean, I just feel that we sometimes undervalue how important food is, not just for us each day, but just, the whole world. Everything revolves around food, really. So I just think if kids get to feel that link between food and the world around them and their own health as early as possible, it can only be a positive. And as you say, not in a preachy way, in a kind of encouraging, fun way.
Right. And expanding their palates too, with all the fun recipes in the book. So just a reminder to all my listeners that I am doing a giveaway of the US version of the book, Green Kids Cook. Simple, delicious recipes and top tips. Good for you, good for the planet. And so head on over to lizshealthytable.com to the show notes from episode 106 and enter for a chance to win. Jenny, it's been so great having you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, it's an absolute pleasure. It's just so lovely to feel that I'm making a connection with you over there in the States.
I love it. I'm so glad Jenny and I met, and I'll have you back on. You better start writing another cookbook so I can have you back on the podcast.
Oh, there's one whirring away in there already.
Ooh, I love it. Continue to blend. To all my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. If you love the show, tell a friend about it. Post a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. Head on over to lizshealthytable.com/podcast and enter for a chance to win this amazing cookbook. And as always, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.